This is Ann Albert reporting from the neighborhood of First Presbyterian Church, where we are meeting with some of our neighbors in ministry. David Fraccaro is here with us from Faith Action House to share with us how God is present here in our neighborhood and in Faith Action House. David, can you tell us a little bit about Faith Action House and how you became involved in the ministry and what you do in the ministry?
Sure. We serve and advocate alongside of about 3,000 newcomers from over 60 countries each year, providing direct help with things like food, housing, healthcare, legal services, ID cards, COVID relief, and much more. At the same time, we educate our larger community on immigration issues, so they're not believing everything they hear on the evening news or in political debates, but are never forgetting the human story behind migration and are willing for a little while at least to take off their political hat on that issue and put on their moral hat. And so we do about 60 trainings a year to health and social service agencies, schools, and faith communities. And the third thing we do is bring those two groups together. The immigrants we serve, the larger community we educate. So as much as possible, they come together and they eat, they laugh, they sing, they cry, they dance, they kick a soccer ball together. They do what God hopes God's children would do. And that is to have strangers become neighbors in Greensboro.
Thank you. That's great. And so what are some ways that you've seen God at work or present in Faith Action House?
Yeah. Well, as you all know, within the Christian tradition and really every religious tradition, there are some shared values around the inherent dignity of all human beings. We're called to welcome the stranger dozens of times throughout the Bible and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And we take those values very seriously here at Faith Action. And the people who knock on our door, once they knock on our door, they're no longer strangers. They're neighbors, and they face some significant challenges, learning a new language, culture, and social system, living near below the poverty line, living in fear of current immigration policies, and more. So when they knock on the door, we treat them with dignity. We treat them as family. That's why this is called a house. And we try to lift some of those heavy burdens so that they can move along in their goal of finding that American dream for themselves. And while they face significant challenges, we've often learned that they have significant gifts to offer our community if we're willing to accept them. Gifts of resilience, of courage, of innovation, of artistry, and so much more. So we very much find God alive in our interactions with our newest neighbors. We also have found God very much present in the ways in which our diverse community, including many faith communities, including First Presbyterian, the ways that you all have stepped up to serve, love, and protect your neighbors. You all have answered that question that Jesus was asked by a lawyer prior to the Good Samaritan story, who is my neighbor? And it's very easy these days to define our neighbor just by people who look like us, come from the same country, follow the same religion, etc. But Jesus, in the moral of the Good Samaritan story, notes that the best example of God's love is somebody outside of his tradition, outside of his culture, the unwanted stranger, so to speak. And so we have really loved seeing the ways in which diverse faith communities have expanded their understanding of who their newest neighbors are and have stepped up to provide food and diapers and rent payments for people suffering with COVID, to groups that have come together to go and visit our immigrant neighbors who have been detained here in North Carolina and sent all the way down 8 hours south to a massive notorious detention center in southern Georgia, just to visit with them for 30 minutes to let them know they're not alone, and we'll do all we can to support them and their families through this difficult time. So there's so much more that I could mention about ways that faith communities have stepped up and the ways that the First Pres has stepped up.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And thanks for telling us how we as a community at First Pres have been able to partner with you a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I'll note this, this home, I believe was an old parsonage, mostly friendly ghosts that live there. But it's important to recognize that this is a home for a reason. For a lot of our newest neighbors, it can be a little bit scary to go into intimidating office buildings, but when you're able to enter into a house and be greeted by people from your own culture or faith or that speak your language, that treat you with dignity and respect, that can be so incredibly healing, especially nowadays in this divided world where immigrants are often used as a scapegoat. And so, number one, First Pres just providing this house has been life-saving, if not life-changing, for thousands of our newest neighbors. We're so grateful to have been in the space. Number two, the Mall and Life Center right across the street. Prior to COVID, we were using that for our monthly something called Faith Action ID drives to provide ID cards for those that may not have access to government-issued forms of ID. And so, we would invite health centers, law enforcement, schools, businesses to come together to be there to educate and welcome their newest neighbors, and to provide that ID card. And in that exchange between those unlikely groups of newcomers and the other sectors I just mentioned, you felt the Holy Spirit at work, that there was a certain amount of healing and of pride of being in this community together. And that had everything to do with that space. Many of your congregants have dropped off food and diapers, have helped pay for rent for folks during the pandemic, and so much more. So we're indebted to your congregation and are deeply grateful for all the ways you all have stepped up to serve, love, and protect your neighbors.
Well, thank you, David. We are grateful to be your neighbors.
Thanks.
And we're thrilled you're here, and it's just really inspiring and wonderful to hear how God is at work with Faith Action House.
I think so too.
Thank you.
Thanks.